All right, let's begin. Okay. Hello, everyone. I warmly welcome you to the December edition of the WSO2 Identity Server Community Call. I'm Omidu, and I'll be moderating today's session. So we have finally reached the end of this year. Time just flew by. A lot of things happen around us, but overall, it has been an exciting 12 months for everyone here at WSO2 as well as everyone here in the WSO2 Identity Server team. So we'll just like to briefly touch upon like what happened in terms of identity access management team in the last couple of months. But before that, I quickly want to address a more bigger issue at hand. So most of you may be aware that about this Log4j 0-day vulnerability that has surfaced during the last couple of days. It has been a busy couple of days for everyone here at WSO2. The entire organization has been working hard to promptly mitigate the imminent threat due to the vulnerabilities. So for our community users, we have published this security article, which explains information about the products that which got impacted due to this Log4j vulnerability, and we have also included the information on what steps you have to take to mitigate this immediate threat due to this vulnerability. So we do have, internally we have a set of products which we have been using, like we have used Log4j, the range of Log4j versions which were vulnerable. But so as an immediate step, this post covers what exactly you can do to mitigate this in your environment. So if you have not done any action up to this point, and if you are using a vulnerable version, and not just Identity Server, any other WSO2 product which has Log4j dependence included, please visit this link and take necessary action to make sure that your deployment is safe from this vulnerability. So that's about it. So if you have, again, any questions on on this particular problem or the issue at hand, please reach us to our Slack channel. So our engineering team will get back to you if you run into any issues like while applying these mitigations, etc. So yeah, that's about it with this Log4j. I know, needless to say, it has not been a fun weekend for us. Right. Okay. So to a bit more exciting news from our side. We have celebrated our Cake Day last weekend. So Identity Server turned 14th on 11th December. So for us, it has been, again, a very exciting couple of months. Have been a lot of things happen. We did some good stuff in terms of identity and access management. So I think our head of identity and access management practice, JIT, has summed up some of the things that we have done during the last 12 months. So this basically covers a bit about like what value that we have managed to bring to the organizations who's been using WSO2 Identity Server, and what new additions we have introduced with Identity Server 5.11, the feature set. So we basically try to enhance the developer's experience overall with some SDKs and samples. So we introduced device flow, especially to cater device authentication requirements, and on top of that, some more features which has been requested from the community as well as our subscribers, and covering a range of different IAM capabilities. And most importantly, we launched Ascadio on October as an early adopter release. It's the our brand new IDaaS solution, a developer-focused IDaaS solution. So in case if you haven't tried it out, visit to WSO2.com Ascadio and sign up and see what Ascadio has offered. So we have a range of like features included in this IDaaS with a developer in mind. You can easily address some of the more prominent use cases in identity and access management industry that you want to address. Just head out to the wso2.com/Ascadio and see what's Ascadio is all about. Next, from community point of view, again, we have done great. So our Slack channel, we have totally close to 1,300 members. We managed to hold 11 community calls overall. Our team has published 100 IAM blogs so far this year. It's again a great achievement. So a bit of a typo, but we have done close to 20 identity in 15 sessions, where we covered a lot of identity and access management use cases, which can be achieved by WSO2 Identity Server within like 15 minutes. And we also launched our developer community, IAM for Devs, which currently like catering, addressing requirements for our Ascadio community users, and soon to be rolled out for can be utilized for other use cases, other community use cases of WSO2 Identity Server. Also, we have included some what to 2022 will look like for WSO2 Identity Server and IAM business overall. So we'll add this link to the chat. So if you're interested, you can have a look. Again, a big thank you for our community who has been with us throughout. We hope that you'll stick around with us in the coming years as well. Right. So again, we have two interesting sessions lined up today, as usual. First, we have Buddhima from our platform engineering team. So he's going to talk about tuning WSO2 Identity Server for the specifically for the Kubernetes environment. I'm going to hand over to Buddhima to take over this session. Buddhima?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So good evening to you all, and good morning to everyone joining from America. And today we'll be discussing one of my blogs I have recently published. So this blog is about performance tuning WSO2 Identity Server Kubernetes Deployment. So from an earlier blog of mine, I have discussed how to deploy Identity Server in a Kubernetes environment. So this includes how to set up a mini cluster, how to partition your cluster, and how to add config maps, how to expose your service, Identity Server service, and how to change your container level configuration and stuff. So this performance tuning block is kind of an extension to that one. So this will be more focusing on the performance aspect of how to use the basic concepts of Kubernetes and improve the performance of Identity Server deployment. So we will be using some basic functionalities of Kubernetes and some configurations of Identity Server to improve the performance. So when it comes to performance, so the lack of performance can lead to several issues such as damaged customer relations, loss of income, and that in peak hours our systems could fail and business can fail, and also our competitiveness with other systems also getting reduced. So to avoid these problems, it is necessary to prioritize the non-functional requirements such as performance. So in my blog, I have listed down 7 factors that can impact the performance of Identity Server. So during the blog, I have gone through each one of them and provide insights on how to identify those and bottlenecks and how to fix them. So I'm like, with the time constraints, I'm not going to demonstrate each and everything, but I have scheduled a small demo at the end of the session to demonstrate how the HPA works and to demonstrate the scaling. So, so first, let's discuss about how the memory and the CPU allocation happens in Kubernetes. So Kubernetes provides like, so Identity Server normally loads all its stuff to the memory from when we send a request to a tenant or super tenant, or so it always loads those data into the its memory before processing those requests. So in that case, memory is a crucial element for the Identity Server. So in the AWS, sorry, in the Kubernetes level, we can configure this using the deployment ML using the resource. We can configure this from the container level using the request, using setting request and limit. So the memory request is something like the guaranteed amount of memory that the Kubernetes provide to this container, and the CPU is same as like the guaranteed amount of CPU that the Kubernetes provide to this container. On the other hand, the limit is the maximum that this container can use. So there can be chances like this container can reach the maximum, but that is not guaranteed. The reason is like if the virtual machine, the VM we use, has those resources that can be allocated, but there can be scenarios that the VM also does not have that capability. So in such cases, this is not guaranteed, but Kubernetes guarantees is the container will not go beyond this number. So to like recently we have added a feature to Identity Server to lock the memory, JVM level memory. So earlier we didn't have any way to monitor the JVM level metrics from the pod. So we now have like we can add this configuration, enable the Carbon memory logger from the deployment terminal, and through this we can lock the JVM level metrics. So these are the metrics you will see if you enable this feature. So here I have a Kubernetes deployment already deployed using my earlier blog, as I said. So this has simply one Kubernetes deployment, and I haven't configured the HPA yet, and this has a service. I have exposed the service using Notebook. So so when it comes to the coming back to the memory logger, so you can push these logs into some log analytics tools. So if you are using a cloud vendor like AWS or Azure, you do have log analytics tools. So this is a graph of such log analysis. So in this case also I have get those logs, and I have simply added to a Google Sheet, and you can see how it worked. And here so these are the points that the memory gets garbage collected, and you can see that when the requests are more frequent, that task happening more frequently. So this kind of data you can get those from the memory logger. So when it comes to the pod CPU, so again, as earlier, we can set the CPU limits like the memory, as I discussed earlier. And so this is the normal behavior that we observe. So here you can see that there are like around 4 pods, and these 4 pods share a similar number of CPU utilization. So, but so in the other hand, this is a erroneous scenario. So if you are using a Kubernetes cluster, you need to identify these kind of scenarios. Like you can see one pod is getting bottlenecked and it's utilizing almost its allocated value. So it's like limiting its. So as I explained here, it's reaching its limit, and on the other hand, other pod is not getting enough requests. So VM size is another factor. So as I said, you need to allocate what you have. So the VM side decide what you have to allocate. So when you're using a managed Kubernetes cluster like AWS or Azure, you can decide how much of a memory that you need to allocate. In the Minikube also, you can, like if you're using Minikube or KubeADM to background to KubeADM to deploy your cluster, you can still configure how much memory, how much CPU that you are going to you are going to allocate to your cluster. So another factor that you like to discuss is logging. So logging can cause huge CPU consumption continuously. So hence it's better to have minimum required logs printed to STD out. So by otherwise that could also impact the performance. Another thing that it discusses the DB connection pool. So if you are configuring some external databases, you may have already have made this configuration. So let's say we are configuring this to the identity DB pool, identity server identity database. So here you can see the identity server DB pool options. Here you can see I have configured the max active as 30. So which means like that pool can contain only 30 maximum active connections. So let's say we are having 30, let's say 35 concurrent requests. So that only 30 requests can have connections with the database, but another 5 requests will have to wait until one request finishes and releases its connection. So in such cases, that as obviously that can impact the performance as well. Another thing is the DBU CPU. So database identity server heavily depending on the database because we are persisting data and getting data when we are doing almost every task in identity server. So as we have experienced, the most utilized database is the identity database. So if you are configuring this as a Kubernetes cluster, so if there are 3 databases, let's say user database, registry database, and identity database, if you're allocating resources, it's better to have more resources allocated to the identity database when compared to the others. So another thing I'd like to discuss is the scaling. So scaling can be done in 2 ways. One is the horizontal scaling. So the horizontal scaling is like adding more pods or machines. So this is the Kubernetes has already provided a way to achieve this Kubernetes autoscaler. So we can simply configure autoscaler like this. So what it basically does is like if the target CPU utilization, average target CPU utilization in the pods reaches 50%, that will trigger the HPA and it will try to scale up the deployment. So here I have set the max replicas as 2, but if you can set it as 5 or 6 or anything based on your resources available. So that way it gives the capability to the deployment to handle more requests. So another way is the vertical scaling. So this is adding more resources to the existing hosts, but as you can see, like it's not always possible to add the resources. So you can't change the resource limits. Also, you can't scale it on the vertical level always. So it's a more practical scaling method that we use is the horizontal scale. So I do have a small script created, like I have a small deployment already created, as I said. So this basically a simple deployment, and what it has is one single service provider created, and so this script basically what it does is it sends request to the identity server deployment, and it creates some load. So initially, I have enabled the metric server. So here you can see how the CPU cores getting increased. So and if I check it again now, so this is reaching around 700, more than 700. So I have configured the Kubernetes dashboard as well. So here you can see a spike here. It's increasing from the dashboard as well. So in this kind of, now it's almost reaching 1,000. So if I created HPA in this kind of situation, let's see what will happen. So currently there is one pod running, and I'm going to create HPA. So this, as I said earlier, this HPA has a simple configuration to increase the pod count if the target CPU utilization is around more than 50%. So I have created the HPA now. I'm checking the HPA. Still, its target haven't been updated, so it will take some time. Now you can see that HPA is updated, and you will be able to see one pod has been scaled as well. So yeah, basically that's why I have been prepared, and from the dashboard level also you can see the CPU level rising, and so this is how the utilization happened. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. That's all I have prepared. So it's a basic session of how the factors, how the features in Kubernetes can be used to improve the performance of identity server deployment. Hope you learned something. And back to you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for Devan. I'm sure, like, if you are someone who's planning or already is using WSO2 IS on Kubernetes, this has been helpful for you in terms of addressing any performance bottlenecks in your deployment. Okay, so moving on to the next session. As the next session, we have Devni again from our engineering team. She will be talking about JIT provisioning use case when logging into Salesforce to the identity server. So she'll explain this use case for you guys. By the way, if you have any questions regarding anything we discussed today, and if you're someone who's on the Zoom call, you can simply unmute and raise a question, or either you can ask these questions on the Zoom chat or the YouTube chat. So we'll check and get back to you. And we will be publishing these videos soon after we are done with the community call on our WSO2 YouTube channel. Devani, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Umindu. Hi everyone. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, like wherever we are joining from. So let me start sharing my screen. Hope you all can see my screen. So today I'll be walking you through blog posts. So in this blog, we'll be checking out how we can do JIT provisioning to Salesforce using WSO2 Identity Server during the SAML SSO login flow. So like before straight away diving into the demonstration, let me like quickly walk you through what JIT provisioning is and in what sort of use cases you can make use of JIT provisioning. So JIT provisioning is a popular provisioning approach used in identity federation use cases. So why? So like what makes JIT provisioning a widely adopted provisioning method is like in JIT provisioning, users are like provision on the fly. So like when the user logs into the system for the first time, the user account will be created. So like you don't have to have the user account created beforehand. So like when it comes to end user perspective, it won't be any much difference from the normal single sign-on login flow. But for an IT administrator, from their perspective, it would be a very smooth onboarding flow for the user. So let me like further explain this using a simple hypothetical scenario. So let's assume you are an IT administrator in an organization called ABC, and the employees in this organization require to access a certain Salesforce service. And for this requirement, it like you have to create accounts for employees in the Salesforce site. So if the company you're working at only contains a handful number of employees, it would be quite easy for you to do it manually. But imagine there's like sort of like hundreds of employees residing in the company, and in such cases, like creating an account for each and every user would be like a very time-consuming and a very tedious task, right? Also, like doing it manually can lead into many errors as well. So in such use cases, IT administrators can take use of this JIT provisioning feature. So with just JIT provisioning or just-in-time provisioning, what the IT administrator can do is, they can of course configure the identity provider and the single identity provider and the service provider to have a single sign-on connection, and make sure the service provider also supports just-in-time provisioning. So in our example, so for this blog post, I'll be using WSO2 Identity Server as a federated identity provider to Salesforce application. So let me quickly explain you this diagram. So this is the flow which we'll be trying out. So we have a user from our hypothetical company ABC. So we'll assume that this ABC company is using Identity Server to maintain its employee identities. So let's assume this user is also a new user to the company. So he tries to log into Salesforce, and what happens is he will select this option to log in with the WSO2 Identity Server. And then he'll be redirected to the WSO2 Identity Server login page, and where he can provide his credentials. And in the next page, he can provide consent to the requested user attributes. So upon the successful authentication and the provided consent from the user, the identity server will be sending us authentication response, a successful authentication response, which in our case would be a SAML response. And this response would contain the user attributes, which the Salesforce side will use to create the user account. So this is the flow which we will be trying out today. So yeah, let's get into the demonstration. Yeah, so these are the prerequisites. We need a WSO2 Identity Server up and running. So I have it already configured. So I'm using WSO2 Identity Server 5.11 version, which is the latest released version. And then the next important thing is you need to configure WSO2 Identity Server to use for the users to use their email addresses as the username. So here I have linked a document explaining how that can be simply achieved. So you can follow this documentation. So the instructions are pretty straightforward. So you can go through this doc and configure that. So I have already done that configuration. And finally, we need a Salesforce developer account. So you can quite easily just fill the form and get a free developer account from Salesforce. So I have these steps configured. Okay, so let's get into our first step. So the first step is to download the SAML metadata from the Identity Server. So let's log into WSO2 Identity Server Management Console. Here you have to go to Resident Identity Provider, expand the Inbound Authentication Configuration section, and under that you will see the SAML SSO configurations. And from here you can download the SAML metadata file. So this will be an XML file containing the metadata information on WSO2 Identity Server. So we have downloaded the file, and let's check what our next step is. All right, so the next step is to access our Salesforce account. So I'll log into my Salesforce account. Yeah, so here in the left panel, you can search for single sign-on settings. So what you have to do in this view is select new from metadata file and upload the previously downloaded metadata file from the Identity Server. So I'll be uploading the metadata file here and click on create. Yeah. I'll be doing a few configuration changes here. I'll be changing this name to WSO2 Identity Server. So the name provided here will be visible at the Salesforce login page as the login option. So you can give whatever the name you prefer or keep it as localhost. And the other thing is in the SAML identity type, you have to select this second option. So this accession contains the federation ID from the user object. Option is required for JIT provisioning. So make sure to enable this option. And I'll enable a custom logout URL. So if you go to the blog post, here I'll be showing how the custom logout URL format should be. So let me add that URL here. So here for the SP entity ID, I have provided the SAML domain as Salesforce domain name, and for the return to URL also I have provided the Salesforce domain name. So if you are wondering, like if you want to like check what your domain is, you can simply search for my domain in Salesforce. And you can access your domain information from here as well. All right, you can keep the other configurations as it is. And the other important thing is for you to enable just-in-time provisioning. And click on save. All right, so next we have to download this metadata. That's also downloaded. So go back to the single sign-on settings. And here you have to click on edit. And you have to enable this federated single sign-on using SAML feature enabled. And click on save. All right. So next, again, you have to go to this My Domains section. And here, if you scroll all the way down, you will see a section called the Authentication Configuration. And click on Edit there. And you'll see the WSO2 Identity Server login option also here. So tick this and click on Save. All right, so we have completed our configurations in the Salesforce side. Now what we have to actually do is register this Salesforce as a service provider in Identity Server. So I'll be creating a service provider here. And here, let's expand the inbound authentication configuration section and go to the SAML configs and click on configure. And here also select this second option. And here browse the downloaded file from the Salesforce site. And click on upload. All right. So here you can see the service provider application so it's uploaded. And if you go to edit SAML SSO configurations, you will see the issue accession, consume URL, and all these things configured for you. So for this example, I'll also enable response signing. An important thing which we want to enable here is enable attribute profile, and I'll be enabling this as well. So what this does is, by enabling this feature, it will be passing down the user attributes required by Salesforce. So make sure to enable this. And I'll enable IDP initiated SLO, and for this example, I'll just provide the same Accession consume URL and click on add. All right, so we can click on update here. Okay. So the next step first is to configure the claims. So before that, let's create a new claim in Identity Server to represent the Salesforce username. So what you have to do is you have to go to the claims, click on add, and add a local claim. So I'll be adding a claim as, we'll name it as sf.username and give some sort of a display name and a description. And for the mapped attribute, I'll be using mail and click on it. All right, so now let's go back to our service provider, click on edit and expand the claim configuration section. So here, select define custom claim dialect option, and we'll add some claim URI mappings. So let me go to the Salesforce documentation. So like if you go to the Salesforce docs, it will show like what are the expected user attributes for Salesforce to create the user. So there are actually 4 required user attributes. So I'll be using these 4 attributes in the claim configuration section. So there's one important thing which I want to highlight here is like you need to have this prefix user dot prefix to tell Salesforce to create a user object in their site. So when you are doing the claim mappings, make sure you have this prefix added. All right. So let's configure this. Okay, we have user.email. And for the local claim, we'll be using the email address claim here. We'll mark it as a requested claim. And we'll have this user.lastname. And we'll add it to user the last name WSO2 claim. And we have another required attribute called the profile ID. We'll map it to the role claim here. And finally, we have the username. So we'll map the newly added claim here. is sf.username. All right. So for the subject claim URI, I'll be using user.username. So now the claim configuration section is also done. So the next part for us to do is to configure the role mappings. So before doing that, let me quickly create a local role at WSO2 Identity Server. So go to users and roles section and click on add here. And go to this add new role. And let's create a role as solution manager and click on finish. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I already have those two roles. Let me quickly delete and recreate a role here. Okay. All right. We have added a role as solution manager here. So go back to your service provider and go to the role configuration sections, and in the role mapping, at the local role name, which is solution manager in our case, and then we have to provide the service provider role. So to find a suitable service provider role from the Salesforce side, what you can do is you can search for profiles here. And you will be able to get a list of profiles supported in Salesforce. So I'll be using this specific role, like you can use any preferred role. And click on update. Okay, so we have now configured the Salesforce service provider configurations. Next, let's add a new user. So we'll add a user as demo user at and we'll assign the newly created role for that specific user. So now if you go to Salesforce and check for users, you will see that currently Salesforce has these specific users. Now let's log in to Salesforce with this newly created user and see if this user would get provisioned to Salesforce. Okay. So here we'll select the option as WSO2 Identity Server. So we'll provide the credentials for the newly created user. And give the consent for these requested attributes. Seems like I have missed some configuration. Let me quickly check my configs. Yeah, let me go back to the Salesforce side. Yeah. Go to the single sign-on settings. Yeah. The configuration seems to be all right. Yeah. Let's retry to log in. Let's create a new user. Let's recheck our claim configurations. Yeah, sorry, I have made a mistake here. I have to map it to email address claim and click on update. Let's make sure that our role configurations are also correct. Yeah, it's all right. So let's again try to log in with the newly created user. Let's select WSO2 Identity Login Server option. And give the consent. Yeah, and you will be, the user can access the Salesforce account. So now let's go back to our administrator account and see if this user is created in the Salesforce site. Yeah, so here you can see this user has been created, demo user to user has been created. So one thing to show is go to this, and like if you do a change here, sorry, user profile, and let me give a last name and a first name here. Okay, and I'll click on update. And let's log out from here. And log in back. So this is logged in. And here in this view, if you refresh, you will see the username updated. So like each and every time when a user logs in, if there's a change in the user attributes, those will be updated in the Salesforce side as well. So this will also make the life of a IT administrator easy. Like you don't have to manually update any of the values. Like each time the user logs in, the user attributes will be updated. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to cover from this demo. So like one quick thing I want to show is like if you want to troubleshoot any issues in the single sign-on settings, there's an option called SAML Accession Validator. So like if there's a login failure or something of that sort, you can go to the SAML Accession Validator and it will provide in detail information on as to why it has failed. And another way you can troubleshoot this issue is you can go to their doc space and you can go through these error codes. It might be one of these errors as well. So Other than that, like if you are facing any issues while trying this flow, you can always reach us via the Slack channel, and we are happy to help. And like not even Salesforce, you can actually try it out with any application which supports just-in-time provisioning, right? The only thing, like the thing you need to know is like what are the claims required by the application side to create the user. So once you know those, it's a matter of just doing the claim configurations and enabling the SSO connection between the service provider and the identity provider. Yeah, so I hope you got a basic understanding on this. Yeah, back to you, Omid.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Devani, for that comprehensive demo. It was nicely done. Again, like if you have any questions related to any of the things that we discussed today, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or just use the chat in Zoom or YouTube. They're happy to answer. And if we don't have questions, I'll quickly jump into a couple of quick announcements before we bind things up. Right. So again, if you want to like have a look at what we have done previously in our community call, so everything is available or rather archived in our Git repository. It's at WSO2/IS-community call. So you can quickly see what we have done during each of our community call sessions. We do have our last Identity in 15 session scheduled next Tuesday, 21st December, that is at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So in this session, we'll be discussing on like obtaining use attributes for your application. So there will be a demo covering like how can you get obtain user attributes during various authentication flows to your application. And do like head over to our IAM WSO2 IS community Twitter. So every update, every community related update, we'll be posting here. So give us a follow and get latest updates of what you're up to. And if you need anything that needs to be covered in a future community call, or if you want to speak in one of our community call sessions, head on to our community page. You can simply like submit a request, or if you want to subscribe to our future sessions, please register, and you can be up to date on our future community call sessions. Again, I want to remind you that we are available through Slack as always. So head there, register, and if you have any questions, do ask from us. Okay, so while we are at it, do we have any questions in Slack? Sorry, in the chats. So, okay, seems YouTube is also good. Okay, so we are almost at our time. Again, so we can wind up this edition of WSO2 Identity Server community call. Thanks again for joining this call and staying with us throughout. So looking forward to meet you in another session in January 2022. Yeah, 2022. It will be in the last Thursday in January. Again, big shout out to our community for staying with us throughout. And we hope you will stick around with us during next year as well. So we have some exciting stuff coming out in our next year too. Until we meet again, stay safe and enjoy the holidays. Thanks, you guys.